My name is John Stremsterfer. I am the President and CEO of the Community Foundation for the Land of Lincoln. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to a new series as part of our Next 10 project called Extra. This is a web series that we're all used to now these days, electronically via Zoom, to learn from people in the field of many different things here, we hope, over the next couple months with the Next 10 project. This really, through what we're calling the Extra series, is to inspire and inform people around issue areas that really emerged through the Next 10 Community Visioning Project. And with this first one, I'm very excited because it really came to, for our first session, we thought it'd be good to have one of the issue areas that was most popular, I would say, on our Next 10 idea generating, downtown revitalization. So briefly, where we are in the process for the Next 10, thanks to really inspiring ideas from local citizens, we had nearly 600 ideas submitted on the Next 10 website. And now we are in the process of sorting through all of that. The steering committee of the Next 10 is hard at work, looking at these ideas that have come in and trying to make some sense of it all. We're also engaging stakeholders of all kinds throughout the community to really explore promising ideas and opportunities to see what ideas we could announce into the community here in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. As I said, this is the first in this series. We hope to have more to come here in the coming weeks, but revitalizing downtown Springfield is the topic today. I'm not going to do too much more other than introduce my good friend, Jamie Gillis. Jamie is the president of Centro and the lead consultant for the Next 10 project, and she's going to facilitate the discussion here today. Jamie also is uniquely experienced to lead a discussion on downtown revitalization, as she has had a lot in her career working in downtown districts, especially Cedar Rapids, her hometown of Denver, and really cities around the country and around the globe. So with that, I'm going to toss it to Jamie and put myself on mute.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us today. We're really excited about this conversation, really excited about the panel that we've been able to put together. So I just want to briefly introduce you to the folks that are joining us today that have collectively, truly a tremendous amount of, I won't say how many decades, but a tremendous amount of experience in downtowns across the country and looking at revitalization from a number of different angles. So joining us today, we are pleased to have David Downey. He is the president and CEO of the International Downtown Association, which represents downtown organizations, downtown business improvement districts, and the like across the country in addressing their issues nationally and internationally as well. We also have Michael Edwards joining us, and he's the president and CEO of the Chicago Loop Alliance. He also previously worked in downtown Pittsburgh and downtown Spokane, so I'm sure we'll hear about those experiences as well. And then, of course, we have Clemmons Stott joining us, who is the executive director of Downtown Springfield, Inc. So thank you so much all for taking some time to be with us today. Before we jump into the first question, I just want to let you all know there is a question and answer feature on Zoom at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions you'd like to submit to the group throughout this conversation, please go ahead and submit those whenever. We will be keeping an eye on those. We do have some preliminary questions outlined that we'll be diving right into and that we've framed up relevant to some of the key topic areas that came out of the Next 10 idea submissions for downtown. But certainly we want to address anything else that comes up or clarify anything. So feel free to send those in as they come to you. So I'm going to start with a question for all three of our panelists today. And I think we'll maybe start with David, then go to Michael, and then get local perspective from Lisa. But I think the first most important question is, given where we are in this moment in time, still in the middle of a pandemic, in the midst of obviously shifting into a new presidential administration and looking ahead as to what that might bring, but also facing unknown challenges, including recession, economic recovery, questions around equity and conversations around equity, and then possibly changed patterns of behavior for people for some period of time. Are downtowns positioned to thrive as we work through all of this? And from your perspective, what do we need to be thinking about, both short-term and long-term, to ensure that they do? And again, David, I'll start with you.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much for inviting me to participate, and for everyone joining us. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. No small first question, I might add. Basically, what does the future hold for all of society? You know, it's interesting when I think about the state of downtowns and how they will emerge from the pandemic. And the good news is they will emerge. And I will say wholeheartedly that they're very well positioned to emerge, actually faster than other parts of most municipalities and regions. But I think the first thing to realize is that not every downtown is identical. We surveyed over 240 of our member downtowns, and we found that half of them believe that they are going to recover much quicker in the future than other parts of their city as a whole or region. But those are the ones that have strong, as you'll find out later, you know, educational systems and higher institutions. They have a strong healthcare base in their urban center, and they have a lot of residents in their centers. We've seen where downtowns that are largely tourism based and largely office based are of course struggling more. So I think as we begin to think about how well positioned a downtown is, I would take caution not to compare all downtowns to one another, but think about the type of downtowns that you have or that Springfield is, and where are the things that Springfield needs to, you know, really move forward. You brought up all of the key aspects, you know, whether it's community health or equity inclusion or the future of office, you know, what are people's behaviors going to be moving forward? And I think those downtowns that have strong management organizations, partnerships between their public sector leaders, their private sector leaders, as well as their philanthropic organizations like the Community Foundation, those are the ones that are going to thrive most. And if downtowns continue to focus on those areas which we are seeing hit hardest, meaning those that, you know, maybe need to look at residential and equity inclusion as a component of their rebuilding effort, or those that are largely dependent on the office worker alone, we're going to have to rethink, you know, some of that for the next 3 to 5 years as part of our recovery. But those downtowns that are, you know, doing well and have those components already, they're just going to continue to accelerate their success. You know, where we have empty urban centers that were largely office, we have equally thriving urban neighborhoods who are really home to where we're all living now in our work from home conditions. So I think the short answer is it's less about the downtown itself, and it's more about the leadership within private, public, and philanthropic sectors that will come together and think closely about the strengths and or challenges of your urban center, and then focus on that as your work moving forward. I think that's what Next 10 is so well positioned to be doing at this exact moment.
Thank you, David. Michael, share a little bit about this from your perspective there.
Sure. Cities, downtowns, commercial centers, they've been around for millennia, and I think they'll continue to be around. Here in Chicago, the Chicago Loop Alliance, our organization is budgeting for a July, beginning of July, a beginning of a recovery in the loop. And so if we're at 30% capacity now, we're hoping to be at 50 or 55% by July, and we're budgeting and planning towards that. I think the pandemic has revealed the importance of groups like ours, groups like Lisa's. For example, we are very much into data collection now that we talked about but never did anything about, but now we've become quite a source for data that has gotten us more media coverage than we have in the last 7 years since I've been here. So why we think that that's important in the short term is that small businesses, storefront economy is, I think the IDA typically calls all of that great stuff that people tend to see and think that that's why downtown is vital and in an attractive place. You know, we need to give them good data so that they can make better decisions. And we think that that's real value in terms of their recovery. So we're bullish on the future of downtown Chicago and downtowns in general. I do agree with David. Some will come back faster than others, but I do think there's a real opportunity moving away from big cities like Chicago and the cost and the expense and the density associated with that, and our real opportunities for places like Springfield and cities like that. So I think that Next 10 positions you to kind of capture these changing behaviors, whether they're folks my age that are looking to retire or looking for our second career, or if they're millennials. Entrepreneurship is another thing that I think will be coming. When this thing comes back, it's going to come back very fast, and I think we just need to be ready.
Thank you, Michael. Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks to the Community Foundation and the Next 10 for having this very important discussion today. It's greatly appreciated. I agree. I am also, very bullish on downtown Springfield, but it depends on what we do next. And certainly the pandemic has shown that we are not where we need to be on residential living downtown, to David's point. We've been talking about that we need more residential living to return to downtown Springfield since about 1979. And so, will the pandemic finally be that reason that we really, really focus on it? I am optimistic on that because we are seeing a turnover in our downtown buildings from, longtime families who really created the wealth in Springfield, in downtown Springfield. But, several generations on, their family members have moved out of Springfield. They're not really engaged in the day-to-day life of what a downtown revitalization, project would be. And so when you look back at 2020 for Springfield, we've had more than 15 properties actually purchased by what I would call next generation property developers. People who live here, people who want to raise their families here, people who want to see downtown be different. So I'm really optimistic about that. And the other big thing coming for us, David pointed out that, strong downtowns have a strong medical presence and a strong university presence. And I think that 2020 will be the year, or 2021 will be the year that we finally see this innovation hub become a reality in downtown Springfield, from UIS definitely, and hopefully SIU as well.
Great, thank you. I did want to ask just a couple, we've had a couple of questions come in that add on to comments made in this first response. First of all, Michael, we've got a question about what type of data you're providing or you've found most useful or most impactful.
We have, we've had pedestrian counters up on State Street, which is kind of the core street for us. And so we've been tracking that, and actually my board has been saying, like, why are we doing that? Well, it's become very valuable now because we have year-on-year comparisons, which are horrible to look at, but very informative. So then we get parking data from some of our members. They give us, and then we aggregate that parking data. We also have the Hotel Association keeps their numbers, so we pull the Hotel Association's numbers in. We have CTA Transit, and we have, and the kind of the big one is office occupancy. And this is like actually how many people are in the building. So for example, the Willis Tower typically has 5,000 people in there. They're operating at less than 10%. So there's, less than 500 people rattling around inside that enormous tower. So those, and then that's all on the backdrop of our positivity rating. So I can send a copy of this to you, Lisa. You can share it.
That's great. And I can attest to the difficulty of getting office worker data. So I'm very impressed.
Well, what we have is, I should say, we're always trying to improve the data. So in the first instance, we had a property manager, CBRE, who was willing to share with us 12 buildings. And so it's not exactly perfect. But now we found out that these key card companies, Castle is the one we use here, they track that nationally, internationally. And so you can get a Chicago number in terms of actually how many people are in your building, through that group, if maybe you're a customer of theirs.
Great, thank you so much. David, I do want to follow up with you too. You had mentioned, and in my question, I talked a little bit about equity. You had mentioned equity and inclusion and the work being done by downtowns on that. Can you just, we just got a question in about that. Can you maybe touch on what you're seeing and what those conversations are that are happening with downtown organizations about what equity inclusion looks like?
Sure. And much of this, of course, stems from some of the racial injustice that we saw as kind of the second part of the impact from the pandemic. And so, not surprising, most urban centers, when we talk about, I think what I'll say is the original, downtown revitalization. We had city centers that were hollowed out in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And over the last recent decades, it's been revitalizing our urban centers. And I think no one's would be surprised to generalize that now we have urban centers that have gotten much more expensive, much more for the higher income, and a lot wider. And so as we come out of the pandemic and through all of the racial injustice awareness that is really kind of an opportunity that everyone has, rebuilding inclusive communities, I think, is the conversation that we're all having, and working really hard to try and figure out how do we achieve that moving forward? If part of the downfall was the success of revitalization becomes too expensive and potentially too white, now let's think about all cultures, all economic levels, and how do we build communities that have opportunity for everyone? So whether that's housing attainability strategy, so that there is housing options for both the high wage earners, the workforce, the police and fire that can live in direct proximity to their city center, if not inside the city center. That's what we're talking about with equity and inclusion. If we're looking at it from a business development standpoint, minority and women-owned businesses and access to capital and things that are really kind of structural challenges right now, we have an opportunity to start to reverse some of those things when we think about revitalizing or recovering and rebuilding after the pandemic. It's a huge issue, but it's one that I think all great all great downtown management organizations are taking a really hard look at to understand how do we stop separating and start being more inclusive in all of our strategies. And it can even go all the way down to mental health and people affected by homelessness. These are all part of community. And when we talk about equity and inclusion, we're talking about it across the board.
Thank you. Lisa, I'm going to come back to you. If you look at the input that's been received from the Next 10, as John mentioned at the beginning, I think the first thing you would notice is that there are a significant amount of comments about downtown. I think we had the most comments about specifically downtown, spread across a wide variety of topic areas. But people are clearly passionate about having a vibrant city center in Springfield. Activity, residential, restaurants, culture, parks, trails, bikeability, all things that were mentioned. Can you share with us a little bit your take on where the opportunities for downtown Springfield are and where you see challenges? And I want to also weave into this the question/comment that just came through, noting that there was some news today that preliminary census data showing that 79,000 people have left Illinois. And how do you see this? What do you think of this data? How also do you see this impacting not only Illinois, but downtown specifically? And maybe you can share your thoughts on Springfield and that particular data as well. And then Michael, if you have anything to add too, you can comment as well at the end.
That's another big topic, the out-migration. Part of the reason I was talking so much about residential before was that, Springfield was called the top 5 post-pandemic cities, right? And that's because of our size. I think someone made the point earlier that those of us with a smaller sized community possibly have the opportunity to capture some people that we hadn't before. You can live wherever you want. I heard a lot of stories over the last year of people moving back home to Springfield to start their families, and moving from Seattle or Chicago or Boston back to Central Illinois. So I think that that's also a big story. Opportunities otherwise, I really think to truly become that post-pandemic city, we definitely need more what I would call big city living in a less dense environment. So that really points to the fact that we do need to keep adding more apartments, but that is a great opportunity for us. Also, when you look at downtown Springfield, the barrier to entry for small businesses is very low. We have a really great track record of a business starting in downtown Springfield, and in only 3 or 4 years' time, being able to move and expand to another part of town. And expansion is a huge key from that. You know, they've developed their success story in downtown Springfield. And I think you can see that we do have a lot of fans who want downtown to, you know, be strong. But the challenges are there. And so, you know, one challenge is that our cost of living is too good. It is very expensive to renovate older buildings in downtown Springfield and get the apartment rent that you're going to get when you can buy a house for that amount. That is why we definitely need subsidies and really targeted important subsidies. And I think our community really isn't so sure about that. They don't understand why a private investor would need some assistance, you know, from the government or other sources to make the numbers work. I also think that we've moved so far away from what downtown was for this community that there's an actual lack of belief in the return on investment that you can get in our downtown. We've lost sight of the actual wealth and value in our downtown. For example, Peoria had some data done about 5 years ago that showed that the wealth in their downtown per acre was 5 times greater than that anywhere else in their community. And so I'm sure that our, you know, an analysis of Springfield would be very similar. But yet I tend to think that people would question that a little bit, like, really, there's still more inherent wealth in the downtown city center than there is on the west side, for example, of Springfield. And then, you know, another big challenge of ours as we move to become the city that we should be after the pandemic is really a lack of consensus that would come from something like a master plan. I mean, I think it's very unusual for a city of our size to not have a city planner and to not have a master plan for its downtown. You know, having to cobble together a strategy is not really the smartest way to go.
Thanks, Lisa. Michael, do you want to add anything on to that, in particular, the question about the number of the decrease in the population that's coming through?
No, I really don't have anything to add other than when Chicago, the last census, not this one, the last one, lost 100,000 African-American people. And that has changed, and that has changed significantly development patterns in and around downtown. So that's specific to that particular group. But you know, the loss of population in Illinois has been going on for quite a while, in Chicago especially.
Sticking with you, Michael, I want to talk a little bit about specifically organizational structure related to downtown management, because that is so key. And you have a wonderful history leading revitalization efforts in many cities under multiple different organizational structures and with different partnerships. So can you talk to us a little bit about the downtown organizations you've run, how they were structured to support revitalization, and how you work to build strategic partnerships to get big, complicated projects done in those communities as well?
Yeah, sure. So I started my career in business improvement districts, downtown management in my hometown of Buffalo, New York. Go Buffalo Bills. They didn't look great yesterday. I know that. But there, it was a business improvement district as the organization. And that was it. In Spokane, there was a business improvement district board of directors. There was the Downtown Spokane Partnership Board of Directors. And then we wanted to do economic development. So we began a 501c3 economic development so that we could actually do projects ourselves. When I got to Pittsburgh, there was the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership, which was the organization. And the bid was just inside of that group. It was actually the same board of directors. And then here in Chicago, we have the Chicago Loop Alliance. We have what's called an SSA, another whole board, and we have a foundation to do arts programming. So those are kind of how they're structured. And it was interesting because in Spokane and in Chicago, the bid or the SSA it's not exactly a renegade group, but you know, they feel like they're the ones that pay the taxes, so they get final say. And you had to manage that. At the same time, you have the Chicago Loop Alliance or the Downtown Spokane Partnership, who's got all these dreams for our downtown. And so it was always a little bit of work to kind of keep them all on the same on the same particular page. And so those structures are a bit of a challenge, but sometimes you can do some great things. The other thing I noticed in my career is that the downtown management group and the leadership of that group has to be connected to the hidden leadership within the city. So in Buffalo, that door to that group was partially open. In Spokane, it was very open. Like the day I got there, I'm like in the right offices. In Pittsburgh, it was pretty open. In Chicago, I can't find the door. I have no idea where the door is, and I've been here for 7 years. So management groups your board and your leadership have got to get you connected. If you want to make an impact, you have to be connected. And then you can do big projects, like turning streets to two-way, putting in a whole park in the middle of downtown Pittsburgh. You can't do that unless you got the right people at the table.
Thank you, Michael. David, I'm just going to throw it to you for a minute too. Maybe you can share a little bit. Michael referenced bids and SSAs. In Illinois, SSAs are essentially the bid mechanism. They have different names in each state. Can you just provide for people that are tuning in who maybe are not familiar with that mechanism, just give a brief overview of what these tools are and how they work?
Sure, I'll try and do it quickly as well, because it's like this. I call it the genius in the middle. It's this hidden layer of governance within a community. I didn't say government, but governance. And back in the 70s, actually, in an edge commercial area in Toronto, the business merchant community came together, and they said, we'll invest some of our own resources into the public realm outside of our businesses. If the city of Toronto, will you just give us the authority to and help us collect the monies from ourselves, much like any association, and then you put that to work inside the public realm. That's kind of the nature of all place management. Is you have private sector businesses, enterprises, property owners who are contributing additional assessments, taxes, membership. The revenue can be called whatever it is. And then you tend to have these not-for-profit management organizations whose board of directors represent the private sector as well as the public sector, who think about what strategies and tools and new programs can we do outside of the businesses themselves in the public realm to really make our place stronger, more vital, more vibrant, more active. And so to a citizen, they may say, oh, that parade was wonderful, not realizing that the parade was actually put on by the Merchants Association or by the downtown organization, or there's an extra level of cleaning services or activation of yoga in the park. Everyone wants to have yoga in the park. Tends not to be the municipality that's doing that. It's actually the improvement district. You mentioned they're called SSAs in Illinois. We looked across the country, and I've got about 42 different names for this type of organization. So while Business Improvement District was kind of its infancy and its origination, now it's community benefit districts, it's special service areas, it's community improvement districts. It's much more holistic than just the business perspective. It's about embracing everyone in the community. So yes, to Michael's point, you can have a single entity organization, which just might be the SSA, or we're seeing growth in partnerships and alliances where you have not-for-profit event organizations, the 501c3 Foundation for Economic Development, a C6 organization that is in fact the bid doing clean, safe operations on the sidewalk. It's this ecosystem of nonprofits that are going to work to leverage private sector resources to the benefit of the community as a whole.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to stick with you, kind of building on that. I think one of the benefits of these increasingly complex downtown organizations and their ability to also diversify how they bring in resources and all of that and build partnerships is important in being able to get big, complicated projects done. And Lisa mentioned earlier that there has been one of the ideas that has been percolating for downtown Springfield, and that certainly has emerged as a strong contender for a future downtown project, is the creation of a downtown university campus, including UIS and possibly SIU and others, focused largely on innovation, among other things. Several of you referenced in your opening comments and first questions the importance of having institutional partners like that being a driver for activity in a downtown core. So can you share with us a little bit about, you speak with and work with people all across the country and around the world on issues like that. Can you maybe share with us what you've seen in relation to successful university, college, educational campuses locating, co-locating in and around downtowns, and what maybe we should be thinking about should that emerge as a key project?
So this is one thing, of course, I've been thinking about since the invitation the most. And I always caution everyone, there are no silver bullets. So there's no recipe. There's no, take project A, place it inside of Springfield and it's going to work. So I think there has to be a meaningful dialogue and thought process to understand what would the role of higher education, postgraduate education be, in the downtown setting. What purpose? This began, I think the first example was when University of Penn, inside of Philadelphia, kind of broke through its border and said, we realize we're part of a neighborhood. And they started to actively consider their role outside of the university grounds themselves. That's very traditional for a lot of what we call town gown environments, where you have an existing university whose job is education. They're not there to build community. They're there to teach and to educate and to research. And I would never want to lose that as the premise of the education institution is just that first and foremost. However, over time, as the idea of, well, what is the continuing role of the university? That's where I think the interesting conversations emerge for downtown campuses, placements, or satellite type programs. Is it bringing the university because we already have knowledge workers in our downtown headquarter buildings that are looking for easy, access to continuing education? Is it an innovation district that is standing up research and development in biomed adjacent to the university hospital system in the downtown or midtown core? What is the purpose of that innovation kind of campus? And I think that's the critical piece that different jurisdictions have had to think about. So whether it's how do we break down the walls between campus and the downtown and create a better community engagement, or whether it's bringing let's say Virginia Tech alongside Amazon HQ2 in Crystal City outside of DC, because we're looking for that really tight connection between research, innovation, technology, and the evolving business models of Amazon. It's a much more strategic conversation than just bring a lot of students downtown so we have footfall and all the businesses are successful. So I think there's a number of examples around. I noted a couple there, say in Philadelphia. When I think about medical, I like to think about Cortex in St. Louis and the work of that district just outside of its medical center. We see what's happening with Virginia Tech and HQ2. But in Toronto, I think that would be a wonderful example where Ryerson University really kind of opened itself to the core, not only as an educational institution, but also with kind of some cultural engagement of the citizenry as well. So there are a lot of opportunities, but I think the one thing I would mention is there needs to be kind of a clear, thoughtful conversation. And I think that's what management organizations are best suited for. They can set the table for a lot of great exploratory conversations, again, between public sector, private sector, and philanthropic sector that looks at the long-term community goals as a whole.
Great, thank you. Michael, did you have anything else to add? I know you mentioned some experience with university downtown partnerships in your background as well.
Yes, so when they redid State Street here in Chicago, they purposely said that the northern part will be theaters, the middle part around the former Marshall Field store will be retail, and the southern part of State Street will be university. Today, there's 58,000 students, 20 different universities, public, private, for-profit, all within the area, 15,000 faculty. And they all use the downtown as sort of the urban laboratory. And so when people come and people look at these campuses, it's purposely in a downtown so that you can be part of a more diverse urban experience that you might not get growing up in Bloomington, Minnesota when you come to school here in Chicago. In Spokane, which is much like Springfield, it has a population of about 200,000. They did the research, to David's point, they did the research and found that there's all these people going to Seattle to go to medical school. And they got an actual number on that and decided we need a medical school in Spokane. And so they went to Seattle and they convinced the University of Washington. They went south 80 miles to the Washington State University, a land-grant college, and they convinced them to open up campus programming in buildings in what now is called the University District, which is, in my opinion, not correctly located next to downtown. It should be in downtown, but it's quite a success. So they now have a medical school there. So it needs to be purposeful. It can't just be because we want more bodies downtown.
Very good. Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit now about I think, not unique in general, but unique to Illinois nature of Springfield being a capital city. And so one of the things that provides both a significant opportunity and challenge here is the amount of government and activity and facilities that are here from state, county, local, and most of it all headquartered in downtown and located in downtown. I'd like you all to weigh in a bit on your thoughts and experiences in how to work with government, how to ensure that government facilities and functions can add to a vibrant downtown. And I also want to weave in a question here that came in that is somewhat related as to how do you get elected officials, in particular city government, to really be part of developing and buying into the vision for downtowns and participating in getting projects done. And Lisa, I want to start with you because you're on the ground and you've firsthand seen both the opportunity and challenge that is related to this particular topic. So we'll start with you and go from there.
It's an interesting time. I mean, Springfield has been the seat of Illinois government for around 180 years. So, and a lot of the size of the downtown was based on the fact that we were the home to agencies. So we have 10 story buildings, in a downtown of our size because of the state presence. So in the last few years, the state has changed how they interact. A lot of times they want to purchase a building because they feel like that's a better investment for the taxpayers than having leases. They have also Springfield feels like they moved a lot of jobs to Chicago. And so we either lost jobs to Chicago or downtown lost jobs to anywhere in Springfield. And it's almost as if we think that, oh, well, at least if the jobs are going to stay in Springfield, they can go anywhere in Springfield as long as they stay here. And so downtown has become less of the city center. It's been something we've really been struggling with the last few years, really trying to have those conversations with state officials about, what are you looking for? What would make a downtown building the best investment for taxpayers? We had a recent success with the Office of the Treasurer consolidating their 120 employees back in the heart of downtown. And, they just opened in the last few months in their new location. But it is a struggle. Also the issue with the properties being owned by the state instead of leased means that public-private partnership isn't there anymore, and we're taking buildings off the tax rolls. But I think Michael, you said it shouldn't just be about bodies, or maybe it was you, David, about some of these buildings, but in many ways, we often want to choose the employees being in the heart of downtown versus whether they're on the tax rolls or not, when we're looking at keeping the ecosystem going. That's the overview.
Michael, you're up next.
Well, I've never managed a downtown that was the seat of government. And I've often thought it would be a big challenge. In fact, earlier in the session, I was going to say that, I think of places like Harrisburg, and they're vital, but they're a little 9 to 5. They feel a little sleepy, right? And then when they're not in session, there's all this sort of lost population or lost energy. So I think it's a real challenge. I'm not sure I have a particularly good answer because I just haven't had to experience that. So I'm gonna defer instead of pontificating about nothing.
We'll defer to David. David, what have you seen in this area?
Well, so what have I seen? Goodness, thanks, Michael. First, certainly capital cities are their own unique entity, not unlike, town and gown jurisdictions. And so, a couple things come to mind. First thing that I want to share is, I think that we have an opportunity coming out of the pandemic to invite our elected leaders, to invite government to continue something that was pretty miraculous over these last 12 months. And that's this: we've never seen government work so quickly or be so innovative in their views on their role in community than we have in trying to work through this pandemic. And it's things like expedited permitting or allowing for alcohol to be delivered to home. That took governmental intervention to say, we're going to bend this rule, or we're going to redo some of our bureaucracy to make things move quicker, faster, and more creatively. So one thing I would suggest is that we have a great opportunity, whether it's a capital city or whether it's just an area that has a lot of governmental energies, it's much like government has entered the private sector a little bit when it comes to their role as a job creator inside of their community. They are struggling with the work from home just as much as any private sector office building is. And so what's the government's role in opening up their facilities for workers to come back in a healthy environment from the pandemic? And then what are the expectations of those employees? Are they going to look to return to kind of the prescribed governmental way of doing business, or are they looking to be more engaged in their community, and as such, being able to work from the coffee shop, or be able to go out into the open space as part of their role? This is an opportunity I think we want to leverage. But what I have seen in capital cities is they still become kind of like most downtowns, the heart and soul of the community. Whether it's coming to celebrate for seasonal celebrations or during some of the recent protests, it still is where community comes together as in mass. And while we haven't been able to do that, certainly for the pandemic, I think we will certainly see it come back together. So in a capital city, the most important city arguably within the state, what sort of things is government going to be thinking about to say we play a bigger role inside of our own municipality? And I'll share one other example coming from the federal government perspective. For many years, the Government Service Administration, GSA, which is kind of the owner manager of all federal government facilities around the country, they were very insular to their building. They managed their buildings and everything inside and all of its people. And as we saw more improvement districts that had federal buildings begin to interact with that leadership locally, they started to realize that their employees didn't want to just drive into work, walk in the front door, and spend 8 hours during the day and then go home. They wanted to be able to interact in a vibrant, vital area outside of the building itself. So again, it's the improvement district management organization demonstrating that people are willing and interested in working for government, but they also want the amenities of a vibrant, active, engaging place where they can exist for a large portion of their daily lives. So even though historically government may not have felt as though that they had a role to play in that partnership. They're realizing if they want to attract talent and keep talent, they need to open up their doors and open up their thinking to be embracing of the sidewalk and of the community outside the building even more.
Thank you. That was great. And I think speaks to a point Lisa made earlier about having a master plan and then being able to get government partners on board with, aligned with, participating in, realizing that master plan as well is critically important. I want to shift gears a little bit. Lisa, I'm going to come back to you and talk a little bit about placemaking and programming in downtown. So this has been a big part of your work with Downtown Springfield, Inc. and a big part of the organization's success. I want you to talk a little bit about the value you've seen that that's brought to downtown and how you'd like to expand it. I also want to note that certainly in the next 10 submissions that came through, there were dozens, maybe hundreds of comments, little comments about different things from murals to outdoor seating to cool lighting. And we've had a couple people on this panel today ask about a real focus on making downtown more livable, considering the pandemic, really putting an emphasis on trees and open spaces and parks where people can be in the city but still have fresh air. So maybe just share a little bit about your thoughts on where you are and where you'd like to see downtown Springfield go in that area.
I think this is really one of the places that DSI and the city really work well together. We've had a lot of successes in the last 10 years, and we've approached it in a lot of different ways. The other thing that DSI is infused with is kind of this Main Street organizational capacity, 4 pillars, one of them being design, creative placemaking. And I know that National Main Street shares a lot of members with IDA because the philosophies are very similar. So, artification is a program that DSI started 10 years ago with the city to create more public art. So we have murals now, we have one creative crosswalk. We are going to be adding a small sculpture series with focusing on Lincoln's dog Fido this year. We have been able to take areas like the old State Capitol Plaza is one of the few pedestrian malls still left in America. And it's right outside the old State Capitol where Lincoln gave his House Divided speech. But it was kind of a scary place. It was not a place where people lingered. So we added lighting there. We added movable tables and chairs, what we've seen across the country. And it really became a place for people to take pictures, for people to have lunch, that type of thing. Talking about data collection, even our work to create the music series with the Levitt Foundation, the Levitt Amp Springfield Music Series in the summer, that really is a placemaking exercise. This is a block right by the governor's mansion that our community has kind of been fighting over. What's the future of it? We don't know. So we thought we would pilot it as a concert venue. Will it work as a concert venue? And so we had 1 year of that. We got we collected, I think, 700 pieces of data from that, what people wanted to see. And we'll be having that concert series hopefully again later this summer. Plan to start the first Thursday in June because we can have a COVID safe experience. And then most recently was the outdoor downtown plan, which the city allowed us to have outdoor seating outside. So it's really been a place where we've been able to pilot a lot of things. I think going forward, how do we make all of these piloted activities that have tested very, very well with our community into permanent changes? How do we do those road diets that we have more sidewalk space and we can add more tables and chairs next to commercial spaces, next to retail, next to restaurant, without necessarily shutting down a street or something like that. So, and then the other part, David, you cautioned against, focusing too much on tourism. And we definitely felt the hit with our usual 1 million Lincoln site visitors a year not coming during a pandemic. But I think that if we work with our Convention and Visitors Bureau more on what that experience is like for tourists, that also speaks to what that experience is like for our locals that we're trying to attract as well. Because the way we're set up now, until we get more residential, which is, the other thing we're working on, we really need to keep that indoor, outdoor, downtown as a destination. We really need to raise the bar on that.
Thank you, Lisa. And Michael, I want to throw this question over to you too, because the Chicago Loop Alliance in particular has a tremendous track record of placemaking and programming that, you know, clearly as every other place has been challenged with the pandemic. So can you talk to us a little bit about what's working, what you see going forward as we emerge from the pandemic as being successful in those arenas?
Yeah, so nothing that we did last year, 2 years ago, were we able to do last year. So one of our premier events is called Activate, and this is when we get 2,000 people into an alley. You know, everybody's like this, drinking their beer, having a glass of wine, listening to great music, watching murals being painted, and like nobody would want to do that now because of the pandemic. So what's sort of the next phase of that? So we basically took last year off, and as I said earlier, we're not really planning on downtown being back until July. So everything's virtual. Placemaking is virtual until July, and then we will start to roll out some, hopefully some in-person programming. So as an example, Activate, instead of being 2,000 people in an alley, because now we have storefronts that are available, it will go back to what it was before that, which is something called Art Loop Open. And so we'll have a muralist or an artist in some storefronts. It'll be a ticketed event, no more than 25 people at a time, or whatever at that time, whatever tier we're on, and we can gather in certain groups. Ticketed meaning just you're in for an hour and then please leave, and the next group of people will come in. So we're taking the same thing and just sort of twisting it. We're also trying to capitalize on some of the placemaking we've already done. So we're putting together an app and a walking tour of all of the murals. There's about 30 murals that were painted over the last 7 years in all of these alleys to get people to walk, social distancing. There's lots of room there for people to do that, but still take them into these interesting spaces, local artists, and get them to walk by some of our storefront economy that's been suffering. So as they're walking, here's a coupon for Macy's, here's a coupon for the Potbellies, or whatever they walk by. The last thing that we're doing is performance art. This is kind of an idea at the moment. But there's a group out of Europe. Toronto's going to use them. New York's going to use them. I think we're going to bring them in. And so they do a 40-minute performance out on the sidewalk, and 20 people get ticketed, and you have earphones on, and you're hearing what they're thinking. They're not talking, they're just acting. And it's a woman who's very isolated. She meets a guy on the street, and something magical happens. And so 20 people have headsets on. You watch this thing. And they have 3 troops, 18 performances a day for 6 weeks. And it's not that expensive. I mean, it's expensive, but it's not that expensive. And the idea is just to remind people that you could come downtown and still see live performance, because live performance is a $2 billion a year industry here in the Loop, and they've been dark since March. So that's another example. One last thing, we are going to try to open State Street every Sunday from 11 to 4, 3 blocks of it, and do everything from throw 200 hula hoops into the center of the street to actually have some kind of like art festival or something, because it's an enormous street and we can get a lot of social distancing in there. So, we're trying to, it used to be more people packed in, that was sort of the definition of success. And now it's not that. And I'm frankly having a hard time, seeing 2,000 people on a mile-long street, it just won't look like much to me, but I'm getting used to that.
Thank you, Michael. David, I'm going to come back to you, and I want to ask a question about just generally what the International Downtown Association is working on right now to help support downtowns, how you feel the role of downtown organizations might change. I think, Michael referenced earlier that in some ways he feels their organization has taken on a more important role than ever in downtown. So I want you to touch on that. And then I also just want to weave in a question that we got from one of our viewers, just asking, in terms of successful downtown revitalization and investment, is there consistency in terms of how that effort is spearheaded from research to planning? So do you see both now and going forward, that a downtown organization's role is to drive that? Is that a public sector role? And then downtown's organization's role is to implement. So maybe if you can kind of wrap all of those thoughts into a response. I'm sorry to throw a lot at you, but trying to squeeze a lot in the last 5 minutes.
And you probably want a 1-minute version of that.
Of course I do, yes, yes.
So let me take the last question first, because I think you'll have to remind me of, or what is IDA doing? So setting the stage for everyone across the board. I've written a lot recently about how all of last year was like adrenaline driven, response and innovation. And that's what all cities and all organizations have been doing. I think we're now at a point where we have to shift into what may be a little bit more of a marathon recovery period, recovery leading towards rebuilding. And that's a 3 to 5 year time horizon, quite frankly. And we think about that in terms of, when the economic recession, the Great Recession hit in 2008, 9, 10 for most cities, the Gulf Coast was still spending the resources that they got from the Hurricane Katrina recovery. It's a 3-5 year rebuilding enterprise. And so while it's very difficult right now, what we're trying to do for our members is provide them with additional tools and research and education about this idea of recovery planning. And it's a marathon, so it's a sustained, not as many super quick wins as it is kind of strategic thinking about rebuilding our community. Going back to some of my earlier comments around, what is that inclusive community look like for the future? So I think, to the audience members' question, I think one of the benefits of the downtown organizations is, quite frankly, they're not bound to election cycles. They're able to sustain longer term visions for what they think is going to be needed economically, environmentally, as well as socially in building community. And very unselfishly, they're also very good at determining when are they there to set the table for a conversation amongst private and public sector, for instance. When are they there to lead, which some do in their own downtown master planning environments? And when are they there as more of a support mechanism or as a communication conduit? Again, it's not a single silver bullet, but we teach adaptive leadership to all of our members. And the idea is recognizing what role can you best serve in your community for any given project. So when Michael talks about activating alleys and laneways, he's physically doing that work with his team, helping to get it off the ground. But when it comes time to closing down State Street, it may be more of, getting agreement by the property owners that if someone can't park in front of your store, it's okay. We're going to try and bring more people to the entire area that we all benefit from. And it's more of a broker of an idea. So we're trying to teach our members to make that shift towards recovery. Michael's dead on with his thoughts around, we too think the first 6 months of this year are still largely virtual, but will start to emerge for the second 6 months. But ultimately, it's a 3-year time horizon of what's it going to take to bring back storefront commercial, what's it going to take to bring back office workers and have them feel comfortable? How can we work with landlords to understand that there are some creative ways to reoccupy some of the space in the interim until you have the full economic recovery in 3 to 5 years. One example like that would be a property owner who had a restaurant that went defunct has a huge capital asset in the restaurant facility. Well, rather than having it sit dark, they'd rather bring someone in to use it even as a ghost kitchen for some level of rent and some level of activity and some level of engagement. And the role of the downtown organization may be, how do we develop that strategy and then communicate it out to the world that there is some form of open outdoor dining fed by multiple different restaurants or ghost kitchens right in the district. And that's going to help us get over this first recovery period as we go to rebuilding. So we're just trying to, put some bigger picture on the next half year, the next 3 years, and ultimately the next 5 years. Bit of a long time. That wasn't 1 minute. My apologies.
It's quite all right. That was fantastic. And one of the last questions that just came in was about the importance of having plans. And I think formal plans is something we've kind of touched on throughout this. But again, I think it builds into what you were saying, David, too, that there's a master vision, which I think we're beginning to talk about as we talk about the next 10. And there's going to have to be phases and steps within that, given this unique moment that we're in as well, just globally, but also for the position that Springfield is in.
And I would say the one thing we've also learned through the pandemic is government, even more so now, understands the essential importance of management organizations who, quite frankly, are that immediate link to all businesses, all properties, and who know their district, quite frankly, better than anyone.
Jamie, can I just add one thing?
Yes.
One of the best things that I was ever involved in is when I got to Spokane, Washington, they had just completed a downtown plan process with lots of action items. So of course we printed that. This is when printing was still a thing. We printed that, delivered it out to everybody. But in there were a lot of zoning regulations. And so the consultant put together a zoning regulations, which we then advocated for and got the city to adopt. And then we printed 300 copies of that and sent it to every architecture firm in the state of Washington and said, look, at the end of the day, you're going to build our downtown. This is how we want it built. And so it's and then with that plan, I carried it around with me every day. And every time we completed something, I made sure that the board knows, look, we just completed this. And I was there 7 years, and it was like all dog-eared by the time we got done with it. And, we probably finished 50% of it, but that's way better than, 0.
Yeah. And and it brought people to consensus on what you were focusing on, right?
Yes, and we kept them focused on it. It became the basis for every year's business plan. So every year we pull out of there what we're going to do this year because it was in the original plan. That's
right.
Key.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you again to all of our panelists for your time. We have gone over by a couple minutes. I just want to say real quick, thanks for the opportunity to facilitate this. There were a tremendous amount of great questions. For those we didn't get to, we will work to try to respond to you independently of this when we share the link back out. And I'm going to turn it back over to John to wrap up real quick.
Thanks, Jamie. First of all, Michael and David, thank you so much for participating in this. There's an open invitation to Springfield, especially downtown Springfield, and I'll buy the first round when you get to town. Also, I want to say thank you to my good friend, Lisa Clemmons Stott, and not only for the panel today, but for all the hard work you've done, Lisa, this whole last year and for many years. So kudos to you and all the good people downtown. And then Jamie, thank you for the great facilitation today. I think you are now an honorary Springfieldian with all the work you're doing here with the Next 10 project. It's been so much fun and lots more to go. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today. There are going to be more of these here in the coming weeks. We're working on the next session as we speak. There's emails flying around to get another topical area of interest for the Next 10. Until the next time, please go to tn10.org and keep looking at that idea board, because it's not just now, it's the next 10 and then the next 10 after that. We want to keep ideas flowing. So thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.